I'm so excited that you've decided to invest your time in our course for a professional diploma in candle making. Over the duration of these modules, we will be covering candle production setup, basic and advanced candle making, candle customization, as well as how to market your candle making business. During this lesson, we are going to be discussing the following objectives: stating the difference between the waxes that can be used, identifying differentiating qualities of each wax type, and explaining which wax is appropriate for the type of candle being made. It's a good idea to keep in mind that nobody can give you all the answers you need about one type of wax. On every website you see these products advertised, shop owners will advise you of their findings when using the product, but also urge you to conduct your own tests. This is because nobody can speak to the exact conditions where you are making your candles. Pioneering your own way forward is a necessity in your intimate understanding of these waxes. You will ultimately be your best guide as to what works and what doesn't. Our first topic in this lesson is on stating the different types of wax that can be used. First up is beeswax. What you might remember from our previous lesson is that beeswax is an entirely naturally made wax form. It is made by the western honeybee, who secretes an oily organic compound from specialized glands on their bodies, 4 pairs of them to be exact. This waxy secretion appears as a scale that contains no color or taste and is technically rather brittle. The worker bees then use their forelegs to move the scale from their abdomens to their mouths. They chew it to combine it with their saliva and then transfer it to the honeycomb they're creating. The final product can contain up to 284 compounds. Something interesting to note is that beeswax is technically clear, but gains its creamy yellow coloring via the addition of pollen oils as the bees bring it in from outside. Beeswax is a marvel and something extraordinarily precious to behold, owing to the instinctual intelligence of the tiny creatures making it, especially taking into account the fact that it functions to regulate the optimum temperature of the hive, act as a residence and area to raise young, and is a food storage facility too. It's taken the bee thousands of years to discern that hexagons are the ideal way to build their comb in order to hold the maximum amount of honey and use the minimum amount of wax to do so. Gaining the wax from a hive so that it can be used for our purposes in candle making is a rather interesting and very labor-intensive process. Beekeepers will remove the honeycomb from the hive and open up the hexagonal cells to release the honey. This means cutting open and removing the wax caps with a knife. These are saved to combine with the rest of the wax later. Once the honey has been drained from the honeycomb, the leftover wax needs to be cleaned and have the remnants of the honey removed via a clarifying process done in hot water. Following this, we are left with the luxurious honey-scented wax that can now be used to make our candle masterpieces. Here's a fun fact for you. The bees responsible for producing wax are the younger ones, namely those aged between 12 and 20 days old. Once they age beyond this point and begin taking responsibility for collecting pollen and nectar, the glands that were producing the wax will start to atrophy or degenerate. They don't lose their wax-making abilities entirely, but as their responsibility to the hive shifts, their wax-making capacity diminishes. Next, we have paraffin wax. Paraffin wax has been the most commonly used form of candle wax for many years and is also known as mineral wax. Ever since the 1850s, when it was first invented, people have gravitated towards this medium owing to its lack of color and smell. While there are those who don't like this type of wax owing to it being a derivative of the oil refinement process, it has been argued that it isn't a bad thing to have a functional use for byproducts that would otherwise have been discarded. There is also still a debate about the toxicity of this wax and the chemicals it releases into the air. But the fact that it is derived from oil does not automatically make it toxic. Next up is soy wax. How was this delightful wax form created, you may ask? Well, In 1991, a candle-making pioneer named Michael Richards created the first version of soy wax as a means to save costs on expensive beeswax without having to use the paraffin wax that he didn't enjoy working with. He created a blended vegetable oil containing both soy and palm oil, but the majority of soy. While not purely soy wax, this was the first blend of vegetable waxes ever created, and it paved our way towards the ultimately pure soy wax that can be bought today. Soy wax, as the name indicates, is made purely from soybeans and is what is known as a vegetable-based wax. You may or may not have heard a lot about this particular type of wax, owing to the fact that it has only first been made in 1996. Creating this product is a refined process of harvesting the soybeans, washing them, cracking them, and rolling them into flake. Following this, an extraction process takes place, whereby oils are removed from the flakes and hydrogenated. This hydrogenation process entails turning the oil, which is a liquid fat, into a solid wax via the addition of hydrogen. This ultimately alters the properties of the oil, making it capable of being solid at room temperature and a liquid when melted. This means, most notably, that the melting point of the oil itself is changed. To better enhance your understanding of how hydrogenation works, we can compare this to how scientists developed margarine from vegetable oils. The process to achieve these two solid variants from their original oil structure are the same. While calling this a natural wax is technically correct, there are of course certain factors to take into account in using this terminology, such as the fact that it doesn't grow in its wax form on a tree. There is a chemical component and change that occurs in its processing. The adding of hydrogen does mean that the plant's true form has been altered to better suit candle making. The soybean, however, is a renewable resource, and this most certainly counts in its favor. Something to keep in mind is that while in terms of burn and the environment, soy wax does indeed burn more cleanly, this isn't the only environmental factor to be taken into account. There are international concerns about the deforestation and pesticides associated with the cultivation of soy plants. Something to think about when you're considering this wax is whether or not you may want to prioritize the use of organically farmed soy wax. The next wax we're going to be looking at is coconut wax. The production of coconut oil and coconut wax is very similar. They are created when the flesh of the coconut is cold pressed and the oil extracted in this manner. An additional step in the process when it comes to the wax, though, makes it similar to soy wax. Owing to the very low melting point, coconut oil is often in a liquid state. Think of store-bought coconut oil and how the solid is generally liquefied on a warmer day. The coconut wax undergoes the same hydrogenation process as soy wax to raise its melting point and allow it to remain in wax form unless it is burning. Coconut wax is far newer to the market than its soy counterpart, though, and is a lot more pricey too. A distinction between coconut and soy wax is that while both of them have a more extended burn time, coconut wax has a better scent throw than soy. What you may notice in some of the higher-end candle-making companies is that they will mix a percentage of these two waxes together to lower the cost, which would be very high if using only coconut wax, but would improve the scent throw, which wouldn't be as strong using only soy wax. Next section, we're going to be looking at how to identify the qualities that differentiate the types of wax. First are the properties of beeswax. While beeswax can technically be fragranced, it isn't common to do so. Since beeswax is an entirely natural product made by our friend the bee, it has a beautiful, subtle honey smell to it. Depending on where you source your wax and how it has been processed, it will always have a slightly different fragrance and color. Depending on where the bees are obtaining their pollen oil and what fauna and flora are indigenous to the area, this is the scent that will ultimately permeate the wax and be apparent in the product we use. It's important to note that because of this natural fragrance, beeswax doesn't combine well with other fragrance additions. With such a lovely natural aroma though, why would you want to add a different scent to the candle in any case, right? Similarly, it can also be difficult to color this wax owing to its natural golden hue. Artificial colors don't take well to beeswax unless it has been bleached. A very popular trait of beeswax is that it is entirely soot and smoke-free when it burns. More than that, it has actually been proven to help purify the air by releasing negative ions which, when burning, attach to positive ions such as dust and other impurities in the air and neutralize them. A totally natural purification system. You can obtain this wax in various different forms, namely sheets, like the ones we worked with in our last lesson, as well as in blocks and also in pastilles. Cost-wise, beeswax is substantially more expensive than soy or paraffin wax, but slightly less so than coconut wax. This will undoubtedly be a factor to consider when deciding which wax you would prefer to work with. We now move on to the properties of paraffin wax. Where scent throw is considered, paraffin wax is still the best medium to hold and distribute fragrance. The natural waxes are being improved upon annually, but for the time being, paraffin is still our best wax in this department. Unfortunately, it is also known that paraffin wax can potentially release small quantities of unstable organic compounds, known as carcinogens, into the air while being burnt. While this isn't done in large enough quantities to cause serious problems, it is something that people are beginning to factor into their candle choices, whether it be buying or making them. It's very important to note, though, that this wax takes on color very well, so it's easy to dye and create the perfect shade. Its hot and cold scent throws are both fantastic and ensure the receiver of its magnificent scent capacity. Another big tick in the paraffin wax box is that it's a very well-priced wax and is also readily available. There are multiple varieties available, and depending on the type of paraffin wax you buy, you can obtain one that has a different melting point. The overall burn time of paraffin wax is generally shorter than that of others. Unfortunately, this means candles made in this medium won't have the extended burn time of other types of wax. They also unfortunately have the potential to burn in a smoky and sooty manner. An important factor to take into account before deciding to use this wax is that when spills occur during production and usage, cleaning up is a very lengthy and complicated procedure. It's definitely doable, but we do consider this wax to be rather messy in terms of its overflow. Let's test your general knowledge about paraffin wax with a multiple choice question. How might you go about removing wax from the exterior of a candle holder without using something sharp that could potentially scratch the holder? Would you use A, a chemical solvent, B, ice water, or C, a hairdryer? If you recognize the answer, you can pop it into Morpheus now. The correct answer to this question is B, ice water. The reason this method works is because the cooling of the wax causes it to shrink. If you've submerged an item in a bowl of ice water, the wax shrinking away from the surface it's attached to will allow the water to fill the gap between the wax and the surface and force them to separate. The wax will easily float in the water or can be shifted with a gentle prod. No abrasive methodology is required for this. Now let's look at the properties of soy wax. I personally feel that one of the main reasons people love soy wax so much is because of its beautiful, natural, creamy appearance. As far as we currently know, soy wax is also highly regarded as a wax that offers one of the longest burn times. This means you'll get the most bang for your buck when purchasing a soy candle. While new methods and techniques are constantly being discovered, at this point we acknowledge this wax as being the top performer in terms of longevity. Soy wax, generally speaking, is more heavy and dense than paraffin wax, but manages to maintain more softness. While the hot throw of soy wax isn't as strong as its paraffin counterpart, the cold throw is very substantial. Soy wax is very susceptible to the phenomenon we've discussed before known as frosting. These tiny crystals that form on the surface of the wax occur in response to the temperature and aging of the wax. While not in any way affecting the function of the candle, they are a visual disturbance that not all candle makers will be happy with. It is a great way, however, to market your candle and show any customers that it is indeed a pure soy wax candle, making lemonade out of lemons. Soy wax often mutes dye somewhat too, making the coloring of a soy candle rather tricky. When frosting occurs, it can also cause the color to distort to a degree and causes severe visual effects. With another trait of soy wax being that it has a lower melting point than paraffin wax, it's generally better suited to the creation of candles within a jar or holder of another kind. With that in mind though, it isn't especially useful in the creation of something like a pillar candle, owing to its lower melting point and stability in that regard. Soybeans, and therefore soy wax, is biodegradable, which means cleanup after production or use is an absolute breeze. Owing to the fact that soy wax is water-soluble, you'll never be left chipping wax off your counter with a knife or trying to figure out how to melt it off a cloth. Warm soapy water dissolves and eliminates it from surfaces entirely. A point to keep in mind, although this really isn't a con in terms of the performance of the wax, is the environmental impact of soy farming and deforestation. If at all possible, making sure that your soy wax has been organically produced will be an asset to your candle making. People really love that this wax is non-toxic when burning, which speaks to a clean burn and doesn't add any pollutants to the air. It also burns very slowly, allowing any candle made from this medium to have a longer burning time. Soy wax, as spoken about in Lesson 2, doesn't actually bond with fragrance oils as other waxes do. It instead contains them in tiny gaps between the wax. While this wax isn't known for holding fragrance as well as other options, it is sometimes preferred by candle makers who wish to impart a more subtle fragrant experience. Depending on how refined a person's sense of smell is, there are many who may wish to not be overwhelmed by the scent from a candle in a confined space. Regardless, a curing process and time of approximately 2 weeks are advised for all soy wax candles. Allowing the wax to really integrate with the fragrance oils will make for a far lovelier burn than that of one which hasn't been allowed to stand for the appropriate curing period. On to the properties of coconut wax. As with the soy wax, a large plus of coconut wax candles is that the burn that comes off candles made from this medium is clean and smoke-free. It is a completely natural wax, and some would argue even more environmentally friendly than soy wax, as there isn't any of the pesticide involved in the growing of the coconut fruit. Coconut wax has a brilliant hot and cold throw and a very extended burn time, making them good and long-lasting. Again, similarly to soy, coconut wax has a long burning time and is ideally suited to container candles, as their melting point is lower than that of paraffin, and they would struggle to maintain their structure while burning without something containing them. Unfortunately, coconut wax is not always readily available, owing to the fact that it is very new on the market. It is also currently the most expensive wax available. Many would argue, though, that its benefits are well worth the additional cost, because unlike soy, it also holds coloring very well, making it the most versatile of the natural waxes. We've already covered so much information today. Let's take a moment to rest our minds before we continue with this exciting lesson. And while we do that, I'll introduce Lesson 5 to you. In our next lesson together, we're going to be engaging in a discussion on wicks and correct wicking procedures. So don't forget to attend your 5th class to keep building on the skills you've already obtained today. What you've most likely brought to this course is a creative knack and a desire to learn new skills to develop either a business or a hobby. Lesson by lesson, what you will be taking away are the relevant skills to hone your raw ability and the knowledge you will need to pursue further projects in this sphere. I began my candle making journey because of the deep enjoyment I derived from a great smelling candle. It's something that feels like luxury to me. The idea of making something I was passionate about as a consumer was a thrill, and I so enjoyed putting my own mark on everything from the signature scents to the coloring and design elements that created a highly marketable finished product. Have you spent any time thinking about the type of candle you might like to make? And if not, are you passionate about the candles you see in shops and in other people's homes? I suggest you start paying close attention to all the things that draw you to these wonderful creations and making a mental note of the characteristics you might like to replicate yourself once you've gained the necessary skills. Nothing will be beyond your capabilities by the end of this course. For now though, let's get back to lesson 4 and finish off with our next topic. Now moving on to our section on which wax types will best accommodate the creation of a specific candle. Firstly, we'll be looking at pillar candles versus container candles. The most popular choice for container candles is hands down soy or coconut wax. Owing to the fact that this wax has a lower burn temperature, it isn't ideally suited to be a standalone candle. It would lose shape and melt entirely. In a beautiful vessel though, its stability won't be an issue. The cleaner burn and longer overall burn time are a massive asset to candles made from soy or coconut wax, and they can be made with or without a fragrance. If a container candle is what you'd ideally like to be making, you'd be hard-pressed not to notice that the benefits of soy and coconut wax in this format far outweigh those of its paraffin counterpart. While beeswax is also a very clean burning wax, its inherent stability negates the need for a container. You can absolutely make a beeswax candle in a container, but honestly, you'd be hiding so much surface area of the beautiful cold throw and aesthetic that it would hardly be worth the high price of the wax to hide it inside of something else. In making a pillar candle, however, outside of considering the visual you want to create, there are really only 2 forms of wax that would be appropriate to make these: paraffin wax and beeswax. A pillar candle calls for a sturdy wax that has a high melting point and will remain upright in its structure when lit, without the aid of a container or vessel. Within the subsection of pillar candles, you will also need to ask yourself if you want to color or fragrance your pillar candle. Keeping this in mind, if having a colored candle or a fragranced one is your goal, then paraffin wax will most certainly be your best bet. If having a clean burning neutral pillar candle is more important to you, then you could rather decide to go with beeswax. Self-discovery is an important part of your growth in this field. If you have access to a craft store or shop where you can buy small quantities of a variety of different waxes, I would really encourage you to take the initiative to do so. Spend some time with all of them. Put them out in identical bowls in front of yourself and note the different texture, the smell, or lack thereof. Make notes, observe the similarities and differences. Then, in turn, melt each one in a double boiler. See how long it takes them to melt. See how long it takes them to set again afterwards. Explore them like a child at play and let the knowledge we're speaking about today become a visual and tactile experience for yourself. Let's chat about our necessity for longevity in a candle. We've spoken a lot about burn times and which wax will offer the longest and shortest burn time. It's important, however, to ask yourself, what do you need from the burn time of a candle? Depending on budget constraints or the ultimate use of the candle, perhaps you are looking to work within a certain pricing structure and do not need a candle that burns forever and a day. In an event or dinner scenario, candles are only expected to last the length of a meal. Should a dinner candle then be your goal, having a long burning option like a soy candle is simply not a necessity. However, if you're looking to make something that will burn in a home and be seen as a luxury, then absolutely, you will want it to burn for as long as possible. This will make soy, coconut, and beeswax candles a more appropriate option. Next, we'll look at the type of wax that is used for candles that are going to be carved. As far as my knowledge and research go, I have never experienced the candles used for carving to be made from anything other than paraffin or beeswax. Owing to the fact that carved candles need to be capable of standing upright on their own without the aid of the vessel, they need to be made of sturdier waxes with higher heat-bearing tendencies. Carved candles, which we will be learning how to make in Module 4 of this course, are candles that have been over-dipped in multiple layers of differently colored wax. Usually, the carving of these candles, also known as cut and curl candles, requires slicing through the wax while it is still moderately warm and creating beautiful shapes and interest in this manner. Waxes such as soy and coconut simply wouldn't have the strength to remain upright on their own and allow for the candle dipping procedure ordinarily associated with candle carving. Soy wax would also not hold the amount of color dye needed for the overall effect of the carved candle. Now let's discuss the types of wax that hold fragrance well. If you intend on making fragranced candles, your choice of wax will affect how much fragrance can be added to the candle you are making, and therefore how strong the scent of your candle will ultimately be. Each wax has what is called a maximum scent load, which is something you may recall from our lesson on the candle terminology. This scent load refers to what percentage of fragrance a specific wax can hold. To better understand this concept, we could compare wax to a sponge. When adding liquid to a sponge, it will only soak up as much as its capacity allows. You could add more liquid, but once the sponge is saturated, the liquid will merely seep out. Wax is the same. Adding additional fragrance with the idea that it will make the scent of your candle stronger simply won't work. The fragrance won't combine with the wax and will actually destabilize the burning of your candle owing to it being more combustible. More than this, it is also important to consider how well a wax embraces or holds the fragrance. While a wax might have a high scent load, if the wax itself doesn't carry and distribute scent well, then that fact is partially nullified. Soy wax, for instance, is rather well known for having a good scent load, but not offering a very strong hot throw. For this reason, it is often combined with other waxes like coconut wax to enhance the scent throw with a medium that throws scent more forcefully. A good point to keep in mind, though, is that perhaps you want to create a more subtle scent throw. If this is the case, then a soy wax candle would be perfect. Paraffin wax has always been a champion when it comes to scent throw and remains one of the most popular choices for fragranced candles.